Hello, developers, and welcome to Wear OS Spotlight Week Ask Android Live. I'm your host, John Zoller, Wear OS Developer Relations Engineer, and today I am joined by our panel of experts who are here to answer all of your Wear OS questions. Let's go ahead and bring the panel in. Thank you very much, and we'll kick it off with Garen. Garen, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Garen from the Developer Relations team. I work specifically on Wear OS. My interests are watch faces, complications, and I'm really excited to be here. Keen to hear what kind of questions you have for us today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chiara, part of the Android Developer Relations team. I am really passionate about Material Tree expressive design on Wear OS and media apps on Wear OS, and I'm really looking forward to hear any question from you today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Frank. I'm a Wear product manager. My team works on developer APIs, pretty much all of them, and inclusively of complications, watch faces, tiles. So very happy to answer questions on these areas. Excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Yuri. I'm an engineer on the Wear OS team. If you've done any Wear Compose development, you might have used the Horologist libraries that I'm a contributor to. Really excited to be here and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, panel of experts. And I am John Zoller, as mentioned, and I have experience with Wear OS authentication. All right, let's go ahead and kick things off with our first question, and that is, how do I know if it's worthwhile to build a Wear app? It seems like a lot of work. Yuri, I think that one seems like a good one for you.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, firstly, not every app needs to build a Wear app. Think about what your users would expect. They're not going to be expecting to edit Word documents on their wrist. But if it's a fitness app, a media app, or something to do with like navigation or transport, then those are like definitely ideal. And if the answer is a bit in the middle, then think about what the user journeys users will expect to have. Do they want to use this while they're out on a run without their phone? Are they just having a quick glance to something and avoiding taking their phone out of their pocket? Or are they expecting a full app experience? But you don't have to start out building the full app. You can start out extending to a Wear experience, just by making changes to your mobile app. Things like notifications, or particularly for media app, can be extended to the watch. And then the next step is probably like a companion app. Maybe you just implement tiles and complications for quick access to data, but assuming they'll use your mobile app mostly. And lastly, the full standalone app experience. And this is where the user is going to expect to be able to use your app without having the phone around, or maybe even the app installed on the phone. So really tailor it to what the user is going to expect and what they'll get value from. I think that's a good start.
Nice. Thanks,
if I
Yuri.
can just, great answer, Yuri. If I can just add one quick thought to that. So we've seen, building a Wear app basically is a great opportunity to really delight your users beyond your phone experience into other kind of Android form factors. And we've seen that app developers that have done that successfully have been able to basically drive the engagement and the retention, not only of the Wear app, but also of the phone app as a result. So as Yuri said, you don't need to start with the full-blown Wear app. You can start fairly small and increase your investment in the Wear platform slowly as you see the results of your investment. So just wanted to add. Back to you, John.
Thanks for jumping in there, Frank. Sounds like users can build some great Wear apps. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. Why is it worth migrating to Material 3 Expressive for Wear OS? Can you give us some tips? Chiara, I think this would be a good one for you.
Yes, John, I love to do that. So migrating your Wear OS app to Material 3 is a fantastic way to modernize your app's user experience. It is more than just a visual refresh. It's about building a more personal and modern application that feels native to the latest version of Wear OS, which is Wear OS 6. So from a development point of view, migration can be done screen by screen, but we advise you to not mix both of the Compose library version when you deploy an app. So for a start, you'll need to modify the theme for sure. And if you're using Material Tree on the phone, you can reuse some of the code, for example, for defining colors. We actually demonstrated this in the Jcaster sample from the Compose GitHub repository. In there, we have a phone app, a Wear app, and also a TV app. And when we migrated the Wear app to Material Tree Expressive, we were able to reuse code from a shared module that we were using for design purposes. So we could really see, the benefit there. So going back to the migration, you'll notice that some of components have been renamed. For example, chips are now buttons. And we have several types of buttons now, including icon buttons, etc. And buttons have variations. My favorite component is the transforming lazy column, as it supports the transformation effect of the elements. So basically, when you say you're scrolling a list, right, and you have elements of the list approaching the top and bottom of the screen, you can basically add there some nice transformation effect. So if you're using scaly lazy column now, migrate to transforming lazy column. And coming back to buttons, which I mentioned before, they now support shape morphing by default. So, for example, when you tap on them, which makes your app much modern and fun. And we recently published an episode in the Delightful Compose Tips series on YouTube, where we talk about shape morphing on Wear OS, which I really invite you to watch. And then we have a migration page on our documentation website, and our samples and code labs are updated. I am really looking forward to see more apps. And also Tile, let's not forget Tiles, because they also got the Material Tree Expressive Design update. And finally, you can also read about the Todoist experience of migrating in one of the blog posts that we mentioned, that we published this week, where they shared their journey to migrating to Material Tree, and you can learn from their experience. That's it from me, John. Back to you.
Nice. Thank you very much, Chiara. Yeah, we've been playing with those Material Tree Expressive components for a while now, and they are really fun. And Todoist did make a really nice app, also with Credential Manager, which just so happens to be the topic of our next question. Let's go ahead and bring that up. Is there an authentication method on Wear OS which does not require users to have another device on them? All right, folks, this is where Credential Manager comes into the conversation. So traditionally, Wear OS methods, authentication methods, require a separate device. If you'd like to sign in on your watch, you'll need your phone with you or your laptop, etc. Credential Manager has now been introduced to Wear OS. We now have a very simplified authentication flow, and it includes passkeys and passwords and sign in with Google. Lots of great options there. And they're all standalone. There's no need to have another device with you. You can just tap on your watch and you'll be signed in. And best of all, this is a unified API. So you can just go ahead and reuse the same code that you did for mobile if you crafted an integration there. All right, great question. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Looks like this one's for Garen. Garen, how can I publish all my watch faces without having to use separate APKs for the whole fleet? What do you think?
Thanks, John. It's a great question. Yeah, very keen to talk about watch faces. Yeah, so as you mentioned, when you're building watch faces today, each watch face requires an APK, and each watch face requires a separate entry on the Play Store. Now, we've been talking to watch face creators, and we know that some of you out there have potentially hundreds of watch faces, and you want greater control over the publishing of your watch faces, potentially even your own marketplace style app. So taking this in mind, we introduced the Watch Face Push API at I/O this year, exactly for this. So instead of publishing through Play with each individual watch face, The watch face push API allows you to install watch faces directly from your own app. They need to be written just like any other watch face in the watch face format, and then you're good to go. In order to allow this to happen, there's a few other technical things that you need to take care of. Each watch face needs to be validated to make sure that there's no executable code, that they're well formed, well behaved. And to enable that, we provide a validation library as part of watch face push. You can use this on the command line in the cloud, or even within your app itself to confirm that each individual watch face is good to go. Once you've done that, how you monetize those watch faces, it's completely up to you. You've got full control over that. You could build a marketplace, a gallery. You can provide subscriptions, single purchases. You can do things like automatically rotate through the watch face of the day. It's a really powerful API. And what we're seeing in the community is some really great examples now of that being used by watch face developers and designers to build their own communities, their own experiences. So yeah, I'd love to see what else the community can do with it. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Me too. Excited to see where the community takes this one. I know that a lot of developers have been asking for a feature like this. So exciting stuff. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. Next up, we got, should I add a complication or a tile to my Wear app? I think Frank would be a good one for this question.
Yes, I can answer that. So I think the short answer is yes. You should probably add both complications and tiles to your Wear app. Complications and tiles are glanceable surfaces that are easily accessible from the watch face in case of complications, and from the watch face in case of tiles. And we know that where users really prefer engaging with these surfaces to access their favorite experiences, their favorite apps, instead of kind of scrolling through the app launcher list, basically. So that's why we recommend app developers to include both tiles and complications. You can include more than one of each to your app to really increase the user engagement that you get on the watch. Both tiles and complications, they're great to expose self-contained functionality from your app. It could be a data point or an action that you think your users will want to do on a regular basis. They can also serve as an entry point to your app where you can start the user journey in the tile or complication and then end or complete the user journey within your app. So it's a great way, again, to get engagement to your app. And we do encourage you to add these to your app. So again, short answer is yes, you should. Back to you, John.
Nice. Thank you, Frank. All right, right on to our next question. Here we go. Are there any best practices for media apps on Wear OS? I think this is back to Chiara.
Yes, John, happy to answer this. So similar to what we explained in our blog post for building Wear OS experiences, and also what Yuri mentioned before. So before even start looking at build new things for Wear OS, you should look at how users experience your content on a watch. So if we talk about media apps, watches have the media control app, which allow to remote control media playing on the phone. So you have an app on the phone, and users can, control using the watch. So first thing I suggest is to check what is their experience by using the media control app, and going into more details, talking with developers. I'm asking you, are you supporting custom actions, for example? Because we recently announced custom action support on Pixel Watch. And so if you support content such as podcasts, you can use custom actions so that users can rewind, fast forward. And also we support playlists and controls such as shuffle, like, and repeat. Then once you've done that, think about the standalone use case where only the watch is available, and think about what happens if there is no network and still, user want to listen to something. Those are really great use cases for apps on Wear OS, and we published a lot of material in the past, including the Horologist Media Toolkit on GitHub that provides you pre-made screens for you, all built in Compose. And it actually goes a little bit beyond than that. It's a fully functioning media apps on Wear OS, and so you can decide which bit you can reuse and adopt. And then when developing on Wear OS, power is crucial, and playing media can affect power. So think about strategies. For example, think about maybe using lower bit rates if possible. And important is avoid pinging the network connection unless it's absolutely necessary. Then together with Horologist, I mentioned Jetcaster as well, and Jetcaster actually showcases the Material Tree UI for the media player screen. So it's basically ready for you to use, which is already great. But because it's the same that we use on the Media Controls app, it's actually the same design. So it's great for users who don't have to learn how to interact, as they are already used to that design. So really invite you to take a look at the Horologist Media Toolkit. And then lastly, make sure to use the Wear output switcher to connect with Bluetooth devices such as headphones or speakers. On Wear OS 5.1, we actually released a new feature for the output switcher that now supports the watch speaker option on devices that have that capability. This means that if you don't have your headphones around or speaker and you want to listen to something quickly, or you meet someone and you say, oh, why don't you listen to this cool song, you can do that now with this option on the output switcher. And all it takes for you is just to basically integrate with this with the output switcher, and then that option will come with that. I hope this was useful. We have plenty of documentation and sample for you, and any other question or feedback about media apps, just keep going. Back to you, John.
All right, thank you, Chiara. Very detailed there. Next question. Ooh, it's a passkeys question. All right, let's bring up the next one here. How are passkeys more secure than the current Wear OS authentication offerings? Well, that's one for me, so I'll go ahead and take that one. Passkeys are the most secure authentication method on Wear OS because they are an asymmetrically encrypted key pair. So there's no passphrase to steal. No one could ever gain access to a perfect passphrase that would allow them to impersonate you. They can't be phished, they can't be guessed, and a server breach wouldn't reveal anything since they are encrypted. So we're recommending that everyone tries to use passkeys. It's a great new solution for authentication. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. Next question is, how can I get help if I'm facing issues with my Wear app? I'm the main person at my company working on it, and the only one familiar with Wear. I think Yuri might be good for this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. I mean, not to minimize your concern, but there has been a very, sort of concerted push towards shared APIs that let you leverage experience you've got from mobile on Wear and other form factors for Android. Some of the libraries that are most obvious, Compose, while it has a Wear Compose set of components, anyone familiar with Compose will find it very natural to write a Wear Compose app. Credential managers that John's been talking about, as well as sort of common APIs like notifications, etc. They're all common across Wear and mobile. Most of the Android X libraries will run just fine on Wear, and the same goes for third-party libraries. If you're using some library for networking or storage, etc., it probably just works on Wear. If you find things that don't, please raise a bug. We'd like to know about them, and fix the issues. And lastly, there's a Slack channel in the Kotlin Lang Slack called Compose Wear, and that's a good place to drop in and ask questions about, how to build a Wear Compose app. You'll get a lot of expert answers from the community and from the people in this panel. So, you're not alone. Come and ask, and we can help.
Thank you, Yuri. That's right. Anonymous developer, you are not alone. We've got your back, so feel free to reach out. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. What tools are there for me to build watch faces? Garen, right up your alley.
Sure, thanks, John. So there's a whole range of different tools depending on where you're coming from. So just to run through some of them, there's some visual editors. Probably the most familiar to people would be Watch Face Studio. It's a graphical tool, allows you to build your watch face in the UI right there and generate a bundle or an APK straight from there. But something I'm really keen to talk about, excited to talk about this week, is Watch Face Designer, which is something we've just launched literally this last week. And it's a Figma plugin. And so what it allows you to do is to design your watch face in Figma and then export it from there as a bundle or for further editing, if you wish. So this is great because a lot of people out there are obviously already familiar with Figma, already designing in Figma, already have got a lot of their assets in Figma anyway. So it's a great way to move into watch face development straight from there. Finally, what we've been something we've been working on quite hard over the last few months is enhancing Android Studio's ability itself to work with the watch face format directly. So if you're using the latest Canary versions, it will automatically create run configurations for watch face format watch faces, provide lint checking, auto completion for the XML elements, as well as the expression syntax itself. So it's developing into quite a useful tool itself for building watch face format watch faces. Thanks, John.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Karen. All right, on to the next question. Here it is. Glanceware tiles is now deprecated and will be replaced by a new Glanceware widgets library. Where can I read about the Where widgets library? Who wants to take this one?
Yep, I'm gonna take that one. The Glanceware widgets library is something that my team is actually working on. So excited to be talking a bit about it, I guess. So the reason why we're making this change is twofold. Like as I said a bit earlier, glanceable experiences such as tiles are super important to users. We do want to encourage developers to build them. At the same time, we realize that we've been, as a platform, making it a bit hard for developers to build these experiences or these tiles, simply because the APIs that we have on Where are slightly different than the APIs used on other Android form factors like handset. And that fragmentation basically means the learning curve for these developers coming from the phone is a bit steeper, basically. So we want to help developers build these tiles on Where. And our goal is to really better align with the Glance API, which is used to build widgets on the phone. We want to align both on a conceptual level. So we want to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about. We're talking about widgets across Where and handsets. So you'll see basically tiles being rebranded as widgets in the upcoming future. We want to also align on the API standpoint, and we want to basically expose all widgets APIs across Android through a single API, which is Glance. So we're very excited about this change. You should hear more about it in the upcoming future. That's all I guess I can say at the moment. But thanks for your question. Back to you, John.
Nice. All right, thanks, Frank. All right, folks, we got a lot of good live questions coming up here. Let's go ahead and kick it off with a user from Reddit. And the question is, what's the best way to show a countdown or timer? Should I update?
Sorry, I can probably take that one. I think don't worry too much about the cost of some animations where it's critical to the user. One thing to think is how important is it that you're constantly showing them every tick. If you can if the user is only going to care about it in the last minute, don't keep the watch display on and animating every second. You'll use a lot more battery. So think about it, what's the user going to want, and how do you protect their battery? But that said, if it's important, then using animation APIs in Compose to update that timer, it's not an issue. Like you should be able to provide that functionality if it's of value to the user.
Nice. All right. Thank you very much, Yuri. All right, folks, seems like we had some technical difficulties there for just a second. I guess the atmosphere in the studio is so electric that something shorted out. But I'm back, and we have more questions, so let's go ahead and resume. We have a question from TBS Grave on YouTube. The question is, how can I run a permanent service that is always reachable by the phone to sync data? It seems like only built-in apps have that privilege. Who wants to take this one?
John, could I throw in a few ideas there?
Oh, great. Yeah, go for it, Garen.
Great. This is a really great question, and I'm sure some of the other panel will have some technical thoughts about this, but I wanted to start just by saying that for this scenario, it's worth thinking about power, because the question says, how can I run a permanent service? And that may not actually be the answer. When it comes to Wear OS, one of the really important things to think about is power consumption. And running a permanent service is often not very conducive to that. So I think it's worth thinking about the use cases that you have. When is that data needed? Is it the phone that's providing data to the watch? Is it the watch that generates the data that it needs to sync back to the phone? What are the scenarios? How often is the data generated? And then go from there, because you want to do as little as possible on the watch. So that might include things like, for example, if it's the watch that's generating the data, perhaps when that is generated, it can push it to the phone, and maybe that only happens once in a while, as opposed to the phone constantly asking the watch, is there new data? So I think probably best to sort of go back to the drawing board, think about the scenario, and think about how you can minimize processes running on the watch.
Can I add a bit of flavor to that one
Sure.
before we move on? I think the team working on these Wear OS devices, various companies do an amazing job of hiding the complexity of being power efficient, while also giving app developers really rich functionality to build great experiences for users. And things like the WHS API for Wear Health services for exercise is a good example. You will start an exercise and you have a service, and the experience you see is the watch is always on, and you're getting batches of data, and you might want to start some extra sensor manager service to collect extra data, but actually what you're not saying is that the device is basically asleep for most of the time, or at least the AP, the Android sort of part of it is, and a really low power mode is running, doing things in the background, and then waking up occasionally to deliver data to your app. So really, like, if you start to turn on, say, use the sensor manager and just collect data continuously, you will really drain the battery and work against all the things that have been built to make these devices last multiple days. So yeah, I'd encourage you to think about how you can achieve that in a very power efficient way, and not sacrifice the user's battery.
Nice addition, Yuri. Thank you for adding that. All right, folks, looks like we got a lot of watch face push questions coming up. So Garen, I hope you have a smoothie or a glass of water, something to keep you going. Here we go. Next one is from Louis Cognault from YouTube. The question is, will watch face push finally support variable refresh rates? 15 FPS is just too low. Garen, what do you think?
Well, I'm probably going to throw this over to Frank, because I think it's a product question, but I will just say that this is definitely a request that we've heard. I think from a roadmap point of view, I'm going to throw it over to Frank. Frank, what do you reckon?
I think I'll give a bit of context first on why we moved to the watch face format in the first place. As you heard us talk, like, power is a big consideration for us on Wear. And the problem we were facing with the previous APIs is that basically every single watch face was a little mini app that was rendering itself with all the powers that comes with an app, basically, and all the permissions. So it was really difficult as a platform to control the power efficiencies of these watch faces, because every developer could do a lot of things that could go against basically power efficiency. The new paradigm with the watch face format basically is a declarative format, which means the watch face doesn't render itself anymore. It gives us a file describing the watch face in a declarative way, and we have a central or a platform renderer for watch face format, which means then we have a lot more control of how the watch face is rendered, and we make sure that they're all power efficient. The other thing I'm going to say is most Wear OS devices at the moment run a hybrid platform where we have an Android processor that is kind of paired with a low power processor to basically help with saving as much power by what we say offloading experiences from the AP, the Android processor, to the low power processor. I think a declarative format allows us to basically render the watch face either on the Android processor or on the low power processor. So that's another advantage of the format. But then we are limiting a bit the frequency, the refresh rate on what we can achieve today on the low power processor. So that's why we have a 15 FPS limitation today. And as we are basically building on these capabilities, we'll probably increase that at some point in the future. But this kind of try to explain why we started with a lower limitation, and we'll kind of work in the coming releases to kind of relax that a bit more. But today it's 15 FPS.
All right. Thank you, Frank. Great answer. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. This one comes from a developer, Time Flies Watch Faces, and they ask, I've noticed that different watches render watch faces made with the watch face format in noticeably different ways, especially when it comes to complications. Is this something that's expected to be addressed in the future? Garen, perhaps?
Maybe.
Yeah. Should I jump in first? So maybe there's two parts to this. I think it's a good question. It's definitely made me think. It's one of those it shouldn't happen situations. If a watch face is written in the watch face format, it should render the same on one watch as it does on another. So if that's not the case, I'm really keen to hear about it. If you go to developers.android.com, there's some links to finding a bug. I'd love to hear about any specific situations where you're seeing that, maybe with some screenshots, some device names, so that I can try and replicate that. I think in the complication example, which you highlight there, there's maybe also something else going on, which is that different vendors have their own complication sources. So, for example, the weather data source from one manufacturer is different to the weather data source from another manufacturer, and that is by design. So they may be providing different data, and in fact, a slightly different format of data to the watch face. And so even if on a watch face format watch face you have a complication set as the weather complication, it may be showing different data depending on the vendor that it's running on, and that is by design. So to summarize, if there's any sort of overall visual differences, very keen to know about those.
All right. Anyone want to add anything onto that answer?
No, that was a great answer, Garen. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Garen. Okay, on to the next question, again from Louis Cocknault. That may be pronounced Louis. I apologize if that's the case. All right, let's go ahead and bring it up. Will you provide backward compatibility for watch face push for watches that were not updated from Wear OS 2 or 3? Garen, right back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this over to Frank because I think it's a roadmap question again.
Okay, back
Sorry,
to Frank.
Frank.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the answer here is probably no. The reason is the watch face push is a platform API that is part of the Wear 6 OS. So any devices that are updating to Wear 6 will get watch face push. There's some devices that launched originally on Wear OS 2 and 3 that will not be upgrading to Wear 6. Hence, these will basically never get a watch face push on these devices. So yeah, that's the short answer.
All right. Thank you, Frank. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. This one comes from TBS Grave. Interesting name. Is there a guaranteed way to make it so the phone can always reach the watch app and foreground services are killed after a while? Who wants to take this one? Yuri, perhaps?
Yeah. This is a tough question. Not really. I mean, I think the data layer APIs can sort of hide some of the connectedness in a useful way, in the sense of you can use those APIs to pass data or send messages in a way that can work, whether or not the devices are connected directly. Or it'll go through the cloud if both devices are online, or but not at the moment connected to each other. So those are there because we want to avoid just ending up in a mode where applications are treating this as a permanent network connection between the devices, keeping radios on, and really the challenge for you as a developer is how to hide that from users. How can you build an experience that the user is not having to think about how they synchronize data or make sure the devices are connected, but really collect data, send it when the network's available, make sure functionality is working, even if it's temporarily not available. Maybe that's like caching the data and then refreshing once the connection is back. But these devices really aren't designed to have radios on all the time, and there's a lot of work to optimize it, and that really continues to the application. So build functionality that works even while there's not a permanent connection, and your users will thank you with longer battery life.
Thank you very much, Yuri. All right, folks, looks like we are coming close to the end here. So if you do have any more questions, go ahead and ask them and we will make sure to get to them. All right, next up, we have a question from Shakir Kazmani. And the question is there any template in Android Studio I can use to start building watch faces that use watch face format? I think Garen again.
Can I take that, John? Sure. Great. Actually, we've been talking about this just this week. So there's two possible avenues here. First of all, if you go and have a look at the Wear OS GitHub samples, we've got some very minimal watch face format watch faces there that you can use as a template. So if you just clone that repository, open one of those watch faces up in Android Studio, you're pretty much good to go. They're kind of the hello world of watch face format. But actually, to address the particular thing you're asking for, that is something that we've been talking about this week. It is something we intend to add to Android Studio. I don't have a date as to when it will appear, but we definitely would like to do that. I think that would be a really nice addition to Android Studio, and hopefully we'll get to it soon.
All right. Thank you, Garen. Okay, moving on to the next question. We have an anonymous developer asking, is showing per second updates for countdown or timer possible in Wear OS tiles? Let's see. I think Yuri.
I can take that one.
Okay.
The answer is yes. There's something called dynamic expressions, I believe. Dynamic expressions. So if you look up dynamic expressions on the Android.com, developer.android.com website, you'll find that API, which basically will allow you to create dynamic data bindings between your tile and some platform data. So these dynamic expressions will kind of let the platform know that your tile wants to bind to specific variables like the time. We also support some health data like step counts, distance, etc. And then once you bind with these data, the platform will update your tile or even your complications on your behalf. So we'll keep your app dormant. We won't be calling your app every second to do the update, and we'll save the battery life of your users basically by using these dynamic expressions. So that's why they were designed, and you should definitely use them for anything that needs to be updated more real time in your accounts.
All right, thank you very much, Frank. Okay, looks like we have some questions from X here. Let me go ahead and kick it off with the first one. Hi, everyone. I have a chance to work on a watch app, and I was wondering how different is it from a normal Kotlin development scenario? Who wants to take this one? No? Anybody?
I can if no one else.
All right, here it is.
Well, I think it's more common than not. You are able to use most of the same APIs. You can, in fact, now with Kotlin multi-platform, etc., you can structure your project and selectively reuse core bits of your business logic or data loading across where, also mobile, now desktop as well, other platforms. So if anything, it's very easy just to sort of ship your existing mobile app onto Where, which is something you probably want to avoid. So think about like which bits are really needed for Where. But actually, there is no reason why you can't be working on exactly the same library code shared across the form factors. And so it should feel mostly the same thing. I guess anyone else have any insight on that topic?
Maybe I was about to say, depending, of course, on use case, but you should be able to reuse some of the code that you have for the phone app, for your Wear app. I don't know if you think about, some code you have in place, I don't know, for logging, monitoring, all of these, they all work on Wear OS as it's based on Android. So I would say you shouldn't encounter any major issues.
All right. Thank you, Chiara. And let's go ahead and move on to our last question for the day. And it is so fitting. This one comes again from Lewis, and it looks like another watch face question. Lewis, I think you might want to join us on stage next year. You could have a lot of fun up here. All right. The question is, for watch faces, would you consider giving a per minute frame updates budget, interactive mode, rather than 15 times 60 seconds? I do sub-second long animations at 60 FPS, but not the whole time. Garen, what do you think?
Well, I think this is going to be a joint answer with Frank here. I think I think what this boils down to, as Frank talked about earlier, it is power. So it's a great idea. It's really great to have this platform here where we can take ideas like this on board. So yeah, I don't know the roadmap, but I think it's all going to boil down to what the power implications are. And yeah, Frank, any thoughts about that on the roadmap?
Yeah, definitely something we should consider. I'm wondering what's the use case here. Like, it would be something around the lines of a smooth second hand or a smooth animation every minute. Yeah, I think we can definitely. I mean, again, if it's in interactive mode, it's less of an issue. If it's in ambient mode, we're trying to make sure that those ambient kind of watch faces are super power efficient. So we're trying to be more limiting there. But if we are able to look into what use cases you would like to enable with these increased frame rates, basically animations, we could talk about it. So maybe reach out to us with some use case, Louis, and we'll think about it.
All right. Thank you, Frank and Garen. All right, folks, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us for Wear OS Spotlight Week Ask Android Live. We've had a great time answering your questions, and we're looking forward to the future. Thank you so much, and happy coding. See you.
Bye, everybody.